Hello everyone and welcome back to the series of Python Unleashed. My name is Ajay and today's topic is we are going to get introduced to classes and objects, which is the object oriented programming feature. Now object oriented programming feature is a very important feature that any general purpose programming language should have. Python is also a general purpose programming language, and so it has this feature that is object oriented programming. So in fact, any programming language, a modern programming language, if it doesn't have this particular feature, so we cannot call that as a complete programming language or a powerful programming language. Okay, so any modern general purpose programming language should have this feature. Classes and objects. So what is a class? So basically we will just go through the points first and then we will take some examples. So basically a class is a blueprint of an object. Now that's the theoretical part and we are going to understand this, how we're going to do this. Okay, and it is just a conceptual presentation of an object, whereas object is a real entity of a class. Okay, so first what we are going to do is we are going to understand what is a class. We are going to create a class and then from that class we create objects. So first we create a class and then out of that class we can create multiple objects. Okay, second is class is used to define the structure of an object, how the object is going to be like. That structure we define it under a class. Okay, we define that structure and that structure has certain attributes and behavior. Understand it, attributes in the real world, in programming world, attributes will be variables that will belong to that particular object. Okay, when once we create an object, so every object will have its own set of variables. Normally we call them as data members. Okay, and it will have certain behavior. Now behavior out here will be, in programming world, will be the methods, the functions in fact. So the functions that we are going to write inside a class, okay, that will be the behavior. And then we can create multiple objects from a defined class. Once we have a class, properly structured class, from that class we can create objects. Understand it. And in software world, as I said earlier, this point I have covered it, that is attributes are basically variables which we call it as data members, and the behaviors are basically functions which we call it methods. So any function that belongs to a particular class will be called as method. So we always kind of use this word, that is method. So when we call the word method, when we say this word method, we basically are referring to a function. Understand it. Okay, so let's take an example. So here is an example in front of you. Let us have a class. Now everything in this real world can be considered as an object. For example, there is a class called as human. Now human as a class, right, can have many attributes. Some of them I've just specified, like a human will have a name, right, it will have a gender, it will have a height, it will have a color, and it will have an age, isn't it? Now these are some of the attributes that the class human will have, right? And now what are the actions these humans can perform? Depending on their profession, the human can perform certain actions, like businessman can perform its own set of actions. Then a job person who is doing a job, any kind of job. Now there are many types of jobs, right? So he will perform that particular set of action. And a human can also be a student, isn't it? So student will have his own set of actions. Now these actions basically will refer to the methods, that is the functions. Okay, okay, for this moment, now take one more class. In fact, see, if I have these actions like businessman, job, and student, now student itself can be another class. Understand it. Why? Because student has its own set of attributes. There will be certain attributes that can be taken from here, but it will have its own set of attributes. For example, for this moment, okay, just let's focus on the student, and it will have its attributes, that is name, right? And you can see the name also comes from the class human, right? Then it will have, a student will have a roll number in a classroom. It will have, the student is going to have the class, the student is going to have a section, the date of birth, And there are few more attributes like the address, the contact number, the father's name, and so many attributes a student can have, right? And what are the actions a student can perform, or the actions the student can perform is they're going to give their exams, and once they give their exams they're going to have their results, right? And how many marks they have scored in a particular subject. So that everything comes under the action. Then how the student is performing in sports, even that result we can produce, right? So these all things comes under action. Okay, so we can also say at this point that the student class, the class student basically comes from human, right? And this is the concept of inheritance. Now inheritance is also very important part of object oriented programming, but at this point we are not going to get into that. Okay, first we will understand the basics, and then in my upcoming videos we're going to deal with inheritance, which is very very important. Okay, if you are not aware of inheritance, or if you are not that much of don't have that strong base into inheritance, then you cannot become a successful programmer, or you cannot take up a job. Okay, so if you really want to take up a high paying job, that my suggestion is inheritance is something that we really need to focus. But first we are going to look at the basics. So let's forget this class human. Okay, do not focus anything onto this, and just focus on the class that is student. So we can say that everything in this world can be an object, and we can have objects will have attribute. For example, another class like animals. So animals, class animals, and from that class animals we can have some other classes, right? Because there are many types of animals. Okay, and then they will have their attributes. A dog will have its own attribute, a lion will have its own set of attributes and behavior, and a dog will have its own set of attributes and behavior, and so with the other animals, isn't it? So this is how the whole concept of class is. So first what we are going to do is we are going to deal with the class, and then out of this class we are going to create objects. Now what are exactly objects, that practically we are going to see. Now let's switch on to Python, that is a Spider IDE. Now the first thing is we need to create a class. Now what is a class? As I said earlier, it is just a blueprint. Now let us create a blueprint for a particular class. I will just say class. Now that's the keyword. Understand, class is a keyword, then space, and then give a name to your class. For example, I'll give the name like student. Okay, and then you can give a colon. Okay, this name, that is a student, is the name of the class. So this is the simple naming rules that applies over here. So this is the name of the class, student, and then followed by a colon. Okay, and then you will be having the attributes. Now how to have attributes? Okay, now you can easily have an attribute. For example, if I just say I is equal to, or if I say just name is equal to, the initial value will be a null string, and then I can have there were other attributes like roll number, isn't it? Then I'll keep initial value of 0. Then we had a class, even that I can keep it as null string, and section, and so on, right? So this is how you can actually have the attributes inside a class. But there is a more proper way of doing this, and the proper way of doing this is to have a initializer or a constructor. Now what is a initializer or a constructor? For example, how to have a initializer or a constructor. First thing that we will see, that is using a def, and then using underscore, double underscore, and ni, okay, and it, that is init. Okay, and then just use, that is a opening and closing bracket, and use the word that is called as self. Now do not get very too much confused with these words. It is actually very easy. Okay, now after that we can have these attributes inside this initializer, or so called the constructor. Okay, so these are, I can say these are the object variables. And what is init? Okay, init is a, it's a built-in function of Python. Okay, it's a built-in function of Python. We are not defining this def function. It is not user defined. It is a built-in function provided by Python by which we can initialize the attributes of a class. Okay, so these are the attributes that I'm defining under a class. Okay, and this initializer, okay, basically is used, or a constructor is basically used to initialize some values of the attribute. So you can see the name is, an empty string, roll number is 0, class is empty, and section is also empty, because initially when we create an object out of this class, the initial value of the objects, that the attributes of that particular object, that is name, roll number, class, and section, will have certain default values, you can say certain initial values. Okay, now what is self? Now we are going to come back to this. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the same word, that is self, out here. And why I'm doing this, even that within few minutes it will be clear to you. Okay, I'm using self everywhere. Okay, and then I will simply say outside, I'll come outside the class. Now this is the only class that I have. Okay, so what is the syntax? Syntax is class, which is a keyword, followed by space, and then you can give a name to your class. The name of my class is student. You can give any name depending on what exactly you're trying to do, which kind of class you're creating. According to that, you can give a name, and then we can give a colon. We have to give a colon, that is colon. Okay, and then we have to create a constructor or a initializer, that is init, by using this double underscore and init, double underscore init, and again followed by double underscore brackets, that is the parenthesis, and inside that you have to give this self. What is self? We will come back to this. And then using self dot name, now these are the names. Actually, do not get confused. Now self dot name is not the name of my attribute, it is only the name. This is the name of my attribute, that is name, roll number, class, and section. This is the name of my, these are the names of my attributes. Okay, now we will be creating objects, right? So if you talk about one school, maybe there are some around maybe 1,000 students, right? So every student will have its own set of names, roll number, class, and section. Every student will have a name, will have a roll number, will have a class and section, isn't it? So let us create one object that is maybe A. You can give any name, and I say how to create an object. The name of the class is student, and just give opening and closing bracket. That's it. At this point, we have just created an object that is A. Okay, out of this class. Now understand that this class is just a structure. It doesn't have any physical existence. Okay, it will only have existence. Physical existence means, what I mean to say is, in a real entity. It doesn't become a real entity. It will only become a real entity when we create an object. Okay, so once we create an object, it is where this variable A, or object A, the object A will have a space in the memory. Okay, this is where it is going to get a space in memory. Now it actually came into a form, and this object A will have these attributes. Okay, now how to access those attributes? So simple. I can simply use A, and then I have to use a dot. Okay, that is the access. By you can access that attribute using this dot. And now you can see over here, that is class, name, roll number, and section, isn't it? So these are the attributes that you can access. So for example, I will say name, and I will give the name of the student, maybe that is Ajay, and the roll number of the student is maybe 1, and the class of the student I will give something like maybe 11, and then the section of the student maybe belongs to class A. Right, now you can see these are the the data that will get stored into the memory, isn't it? So this class was just a structure till the point we created a object. Okay, so we created one object. So one object basically refers to one student at this point, isn't it? One object is belongs to one student, so that will collect all the data of one particular student. That's, so the name of the student is Ajay, roll number is 1, class is 11, and section is A. Right, so what if I want to have another student? So in that case, I need to create another object. So maybe I can call that object as B, and I can say student, right? Now over here I created one more object. Now this object will get actually a space into the memory, understand it? And then I can give B dot, I can access the attributes, that is name. I can give something like maybe Vijay, right? I'll just copy this, okay, and I paste it over here, and I will simply replace this with B. Now this is object B, isn't it? And class 2, and let me keep the section same, right? And then I can print the values like a dot maybe name, a dot name, right? And I will just at this point I will just print the names, that is a dot name and b dot name, okay? And now let us run this program. Now once you run this program, you can see we have two output, that is Ajay and Vijay. Why? Because we are just printing the name attribute of object A and the name attribute of object B. Okay, so understand one thing: these variables or these attributes or these data members are basically are object variables. These are called as object variable. Why they are called as object variables is because every object, like object A, will have its own set of data, that is the over here, that is own set of data, that is name was Ajay, roll number was 1, class was 11, section was A. So it has its own set of data, that is name, roll number, class and section. Similarly, even B will have its own set of data, that is name is Vijay, roll number is 2, class is 11, section is A. So understand, every object will have its own set of data, own set of attribute, and this is the reason why we call these variables as object variable. So anything you know declare, anything you kind of the all the attributes that comes under the constructor or the initializer, okay, under this init function, under this init function will be called as the object variables, okay? Now for example, now you may come up with a question like when did we give a call to this function? We never gave a call to this function, isn't it? This is because this function doesn't get called. You do not need to explicitly give a call to this function. It does get called, but Python will call this function, evoke this function by itself. So you're not going to explicitly give a call to this function, understand it? Now when does this function, okay, gets called? When does this method will get called? Now this function will get called the moment you create an object. For example, over here we created one object. So when Python will execute this particular statement, this particular line of code, so where we are creating an object, it will immediately jump to this particular function and it will initialize name, roll number, class, section, okay? And then again over here you can see that is line number 14, again we are creating an object. So the moment we try to create an object, so for B also it will jump over here and it will initialize the values, that is name, roll number, class and section. So A will have initial values, that is what we have specified over here, and B will also have these values, okay? Since A and B will have its own set of values, right, and so it will all will get initialized to what we have done over here. And this is the working that constructor does in a class. So basically it is help to initialize values to the attributes of a class, okay? Now what is basically a self, right? Self is basically a reference. Self is basically a reference. So when I said that this initializer or this constructor got called when this statement was executed, isn't it? But then once it gives a call, this object A is actually passed to this self. So it basically says, when I say self, this is basically A. So it say A dot name is equal to null string, A dot roll number is equal to 0, A dot class, A dot section. So the object A is what it is will get replaced with this self. So self will basically refer to this A, understand it? When? Only when we give a call to this, when we are creating this object, understand it? And over here when we create one more object, then this cell will have this b. So it is like b dot name, b dot roll number, b dot class, b dot section. Okay, so self is basically a reference to the object that we are trying to, where we are creating, understand it. Okay, so that is self. Okay, so you need to just give some time onto it, spend some time, and then slowly you will understand. Now these are the attributes of a class. Now normally we don't do this. Okay, like we are accepting the data, we don't directly access the attribute. Normally we access the attributes using the member functions. Now what is a member function? Member functions are functions by which we can access this data or display this data. Okay, so for example, I will simply name this function, that is get data, and I say self. Understand, this is one parameter that always will have, that is a self, which is a reference to the object. So this is one parameter that always you're going to have it. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, get data will basically accept data from the user. Now how I'm going to do that, I will simply use self, okay, dot, and now you can see the attributes, that is name, and then I will give use the input function, and I will say enter name, that is a student name. Okay, and then I'll just copy this and I will accept all the other attributes, that is the roll number, class, and section, and I will simply change this to roll number, okay, this to the class, and this to the section. Okay, so this will basically is used to accept data. Now understand, over here this init function is a built-in function, but get data is not a built-in function. This is defined by the user. This is user defined, understand it. So get data, you can give any name over here, but over here you cannot give any other name, understand it. This is the only name because it's a built-in function, so you're supposed to use this as it is. This is the only name you're supposed to use. Okay, so this is basically used to accept data, and then simply I will display the data, that is something called as put data. You can give any name to this. This is user defined, and I will simply use the print function, and I will display self dot name, right? Just copy this and I will paste this, that is second, third, and fourth, and then I will replace this with the roll number, this with the class, and over here this with the section. Okay, and now I need to delete all this, and I created one object, that is a. Now how I'm going to access this these functions of the class, the methods. Okay, once I create an object, what is going to happen? Understand, always you need to keep this in mind, that the once you create an object, the moment you create an object, this init function gets evoked automatically. Python is going to evoke this function. We are not going to call this function explicitly. We are only going to get concerned with the user defined functions that we have defined, that is the get data and put data. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use the object a, okay, dot, and now you can see the function get data, right? So this will basically accept the data, and then I say a dot, and you can see there is a put data also, and then I will display the data. So simple. So basically what happens is this particular statement will basically evoke this function. Okay, evoke means it will basically give a call to this function, and this particular statement will basically evoke this particular function, means it will call this function. Okay, but understand that these methods are always associated with the object. So you can see a dot get data, a dot put data, isn't it? So this is how we are going to do this, and okay, now let us just run this and see the output. Okay, and see, now this particular statement, this function got evoked, and what we are doing is it is asking me enter name. Can you see this, enter name? Okay, I did not change the messages out here, so every time it's going to display the same name, but we are going to give the name, roll number, class, and section. So if I give a name like Ajay, and this is the roll number, enter roll number. If I give 1, and even that I have accepted as input. Okay, just a minute, I'll just stop this, make the changes. It will just it won't take much of a time. Roll number, and this was enter the student class, and this was enter the student section. Okay, and this is I need to accept that as int, isn't it? And okay, now let us just run this. And just a minute. Okay, that is name is Ajay, and okay, there is something that went wrong. Just a minute. Okay, let me just run this again now. Okay, now we will do this. Name is Ajay and roll number is 1, class is 10, section is B. And you can see immediately it displayed the data also. Why? Because we have evoked the function that is put data, isn't it? Okay, now again let's get back to the self. Okay, the leftover, that is self. Okay, now what is how the self is working over here? So once I say a dot get data, what is going to happen? This object a, so this self is basically referring to this object a. So this gets replaced with a dot name, a dot roll number, a dot class, a dot section. Understand it? And once I say a dot put data, so basically it says a dot name. So then a, what does a dot name has? It has the value that is Ajay, and roll number is 1, class is 10, section is B. So this is the working of self. Understand? So this is the one parameter that always we are going to have, and we are not going to pass anything for self out here. Why? Because what is going to get passed to self is the reference of this object. So this object reference get passed to this self. Understand this? Okay. Now one more thing that you can do is initialize. Also you can do something like, we have some parameters in the constructor method, like if I say name, and I can have some default values like over here. Okay, and then I can have something called as roll number, okay, as 0, and then I can have class as also null, and then section. Now these are the default parameters. If you are aware of default parameters, we have gone through that, how to use default parameters in a function, isn't it? Now these are default parameters. How does it work? Is simple as, now these are the name. Now understand that this name and this name are different. Understand it? This name actually belongs to the class, and this is another variable. This is simply a variable. Okay, so if I do not pass anything, so what will happen? The default value of name, that is null, will get associated with that particular, will get assigned to that particular object variable, and then this will become roll number, and this will become class, and this will become section. So you can give any name. It's not like roll number, or you are going to have the same name. You can give any name. It can be A, B, C, D also, and then we will have A, B, C, D over here. Okay, but just do not get confused. This name and this name are two different variables, because this basically belongs to the class. Okay, and this will belong to the object. So these are the object variables. Understand it? Okay, so for just to get the confusion, I will just replace this by A, B, C, D, just to tell you that it will not make any difference. And this I will give it as A, B, C, D. That's it. And then I just need to replace this with A, this with B, this with C, and this with D. Okay, and if you run this, okay, again it will ask for the data. So I'll give a J, and row number 1, class 10, and so B. Okay, and before getting the data, what we will do, again we will use the put data. Now just understand how I'm using this. Okay, what will happen if I use a dot put data? So it will have some values, initial values. Since I'm not passing anything over here, so the default values will be taken and it will be assigned to these object variables, isn't it? So if I run this, you can see that there is nothing, null over here, and then it is asking me the data. That is because I am giving a call to get data, isn't it? So let me just close this, and okay, and let me just remove this. Okay, and this, and then I run this, and you can see these are the initial values. That is a null string, 0, null string, null string. But if I pass some values like maybe a J over here, number is 1, and class 10, and B. Now what is going to happen? These values will get assigned this to A, 1 will get assigned to B, X, that is a class 10, to C, and D will get assigned to B. So these are the default values, but now we are passing some values. So now that values will get assigned to the object A. And now you can see the output. Now we have this data. isn't it? So this is then how you're going to work with the constructor, that is the initializer. This is how we are going to have the methods, and this is just an introductory uh, you know introductory tutorial. So in my upcoming tutorials we're going to go deep into this, and then as I said, we're going to deal with inheritance, which is very, very, very important. Okay, that's it for today. Bye for now.